Richard was a man who had everything a person could dream of: money, power, and respect. He was a billionaire, having built his empire from nothing, working tirelessly day and night for years. Skyscrapers bore the name of his companies, luxury cars lined his driveway, and he traveled to exotic countries as if they were his backyard. To the world, he seemed to have reached the pinnacle of success, living a life that many could only imagine. Yet, despite all his achievements, there was one part of his life that always felt incomplete, a gap that no amount of money could fill: his relationship with his only daughter, Emily. Emily was 12 years old, and from the outside, she seemed like any other child. She had bright eyes that sparkled with curiosity and a gentle smile that could light up a room. But life had dealt her a challenge. She was born with a physical disability that limited her movement and made speaking difficult. This didn't stop her from understanding the world around her, from feeling emotions deeply, or from dreaming big, but it did make her life more complicated. Simple things that other children did effortlessly, running in the garden, playing with friends, or speaking freely, were harder for Emily. And this made her world smaller, often confined to the walls of the mansion she called home. Richard loved Emily with all his heart. She was his treasure, the most important person in his life, yet his love often took the form of financial support rather than emotional presence. His work demanded most of his attention, leaving him little time to engage with her. He would buy her the finest toys, the most beautiful dresses, and the latest technology, believing that these gifts could bring her happiness. But deep down, he knew there was something missing. This gap in Emily's life was quietly filled by someone else: Clara, a kind-hearted black maid who had worked in their household for years. Clara was more than just a maid, she was someone who understood Emily in a way that Richard could not. She noticed the small ways Emily communicated her needs: the way her eyes would light up when she was excited, the tiny gestures she used to express joy or discomfort. Clara had a gift for patience and empathy, qualities that money could never buy. She spent hours helping Emily with her exercises, reading stories to her, and most importantly, giving her the warmth and affection that a child craves. To Emily, Clara was a source of comfort and safety. The world outside the mansion could be intimidating, and even within its walls, Emily often felt isolated. She could not always express herself clearly, and people who didn't understand her condition would become impatient or dismissive. But Clara never rushed her. She never judged her. She simply held her hand, offered a gentle smile, and sometimes, when Emily felt especially vulnerable, gave her a hug that said, "You are safe. You are loved. You are not alone." Richard, though loving, was largely unaware of these moments. His life was a whirlwind of meetings, business trips, and high-profile events. He believed that as long as Emily was taken care of, she would be happy. He trusted his staff to do their jobs, but he rarely paid attention to the emotional nuances of Emily's daily life. Clara's quiet acts of kindness often went unnoticed, not because Richard didn't care, but because he simply didn't see them amidst the chaos of his empire. The mansion itself was a reflection of Richard's life: grand, impressive, and somewhat cold. Marble floors stretched through the hallways, chandeliers sparkled in every room, and the gardens were meticulously landscaped. Yet, despite its beauty, the house lacked the warmth that Emily needed. It was a palace filled with luxury but not always with love. And in this environment, Clara's presence was like a gentle ray of sunshine, bringing life and warmth to Emily's days. One morning, as the sun poured its golden light into Emily's playroom, she sat in her wheelchair, surrounded by toys and books. She loved this room, not because it was lavish, but because it was one of the few places where she felt free to explore her imagination. Clara was nearby, carefully arranging a puzzle on the table. She had noticed that Emily had been feeling a bit down lately, quiet and withdrawn. Clara understood that sometimes Emily needed more than words or toys. She needed connection, understanding, and a sense of belonging. "Come on, Emily," Clara said softly, her voice gentle and encouraging. "Let's try this together. You can do it." Emily smiled faintly and reached for the puzzle pieces, her small hands moving slowly but with determination. Clara guided her, helping her fit the pieces together, celebrating each small success with genuine excitement. To Emily, these moments were priceless. They were not about winning or finishing the puzzle but about feeling seen, valued, and supported. As the morning went on, Clara noticed that Emily seemed restless. Sometimes, words could not express the emotions swirling inside her, and today was one of those days. Without thinking, Clara leaned down and wrapped her arms around Emily in a hug. It was a simple gesture, but it carried all the care, love, and protection that Clara had felt for Emily over the years. To Emily, the hug was a comforting embrace that made her feel safe in a world that often seemed confusing and overwhelming. At that moment, Richard was on his way home. He had returned earlier than expected from a business trip, wanting to surprise Emily. He walked through the grand hallways, his mind preoccupied with work, when he decided to check on Emily before announcing his return. He approached the playroom quietly, intending to watch her for a moment. But what he saw made him freeze. There was Clara, bent over, hugging Emily. The sight, though innocent and loving, struck him with a mixture of shock and disbelief. His first thought was one of protection. Why was someone hugging his daughter in this way? What were they doing when he wasn't around? In that instant, fear and suspicion clouded his mind. He had always been cautious about who had access to his family, and seeing this scene triggered a wave of anxiety. Richard's initial reaction was sharp and instinctive. He cleared his throat loudly, startling both Emily and Clara. Clara immediately straightened up, her face a mix of surprise and concern. Emily looked up at her father, unsure why he seemed upset. The room, filled with sunlight and warmth just moments before, suddenly felt tense and uncertain. "Clara," Richard said firmly, his voice carrying both authority and worry. "What are you doing with Emily?" Clara blinked, trying to find the right words. She knew she was doing nothing wrong, yet she also understood why Richard might be alarmed. She took a gentle step back, placing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "Sir," she said softly, "I was just helping Emily feel better. She seemed upset, and I wanted to comfort her. That's all." Richard's mind raced. He wanted to believe her, but doubt crept in. The world had taught him to be cautious, to protect what he loved most, and in that moment, he couldn't help but wonder if he had been too trusting. The hug, simple as it was, seemed to carry questions that Richard didn't know how to answer. Emily, sensing the tension, tried to smile but couldn't. She didn't understand why her father looked worried, why Clara seemed nervous, or why a simple hug could suddenly feel complicated. In her heart, she only knew that she felt safe and happy, and that the warmth from Clara's arms was comforting. Richard stood there, torn between his love for his daughter and his uncertainty about the situation. He wanted to rush forward, to take control, to make sure she was safe, but a small part of him recognized that Clara's actions were probably meant with care. He didn't yet see the full truth, but a seed of curiosity and reflection had been planted. The day went on, but Richard couldn't shake the image of Clara hugging Emily. It lingered in his mind, raising questions he hadn't asked before about his own absence, about the people he trusted around his family, and about Emily's emotional world. For the first time in a long while, he wondered what Emily truly needed from him: not gifts, not grand gestures, but genuine presence, understanding, and love. And so, in the quiet of the mansion, a new chapter began, a chapter where Richard would start to notice the small things he had overlooked, where he would begin to understand the depth of Clara's care, and where Emily's world, once filled with loneliness, slowly started to become brighter. Richard could not shake the image from his mind, the sight of Clara hugging Emily. Even hours after he had arrived home, the moment replayed in his thoughts like a scene from a movie. He knew he needed to understand what had happened, but at the same time, a part of him felt uneasy. His instincts as a father, honed over years of protecting his child, made him alert to every possibility, every risk. He kept asking himself questions: was Emily truly safe? Could someone have overstepped boundaries without me noticing? The house felt different that evening. The grandeur of the chandeliers and the polished marble floors, which normally reflected the light in a reassuring way, now seemed cold and distant. Richard paced through the hallways, his mind occupied with scenarios, both reasonable and improbable. Clara had worked in the house for years, and in all that time, he had trusted her. She had always been professional, discreet, and reliable. But now, seeing her physically embrace Emily, a rush of doubt clouded that trust. Dinner that night was tense. Emily sat at the table, her wheelchair slightly angled toward Clara, who was assisting her with the meal. Clara maintained her usual calm demeanor, smiling gently at Emily, yet Richard noticed her subtle nervousness. She seemed aware of the unspoken scrutiny from her employer. Richard, meanwhile, forced a polite smile, but inside, he was struggling to balance suspicion with reason. He tried to engage Emily in conversation, asking about her day, but her responses were limited. Sometimes, she spoke a word or two, other times she gestured with her hands or smiled faintly. Richard found it frustrating, not because of Emily, but because he wanted certainty. He wanted to understand every little detail of her life, and yet her disability made that difficult. Clara's presence had always bridged that gap, but now, Richard felt both grateful and uneasy. After dinner, Richard decided he needed answers. He could not simply let the moment go without understanding it fully. He asked Clara to step aside, and they walked to a quieter part of the house. He looked at her directly, trying to read her expression. "Clara," he began, his voice calm but firm, "I saw you with Emily today. I want to understand exactly what happened. I need to know why you were hugging her." Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew this question was coming, but she also knew she had nothing to hide. She spoke carefully, her voice gentle but honest. "Sir, Emily has been feeling lonely lately. She gets frustrated because she cannot do things like other children. Sometimes, she becomes upset, and she just needs comfort. That's all. I was giving her a hug to let her know she is safe and loved. Nothing more." Richard studied her closely. Her eyes were sincere, and her posture showed no signs of deceit. He wanted to believe her, but his mind kept circling back to worst-case scenarios. He asked more questions, trying to understand the context. "Has she ever expressed anything that worries you? Has she said anything that might be inappropriate?" Clara shook her head immediately. "No, sir. Emily is a kind, gentle girl. She trusts me, and I do everything I can to protect her. I would never do anything to hurt her." Richard felt a small sense of relief, but uncertainty lingered. He realized that his judgment had been clouded by fear and habit. For so many years, he had been focused on ensuring Emily's physical safety, on protecting her from dangers that could be controlled. But he had never fully considered her emotional needs. Clara, in her quiet way, had always attended to those needs. The hug, which had initially seemed shocking, was in fact a natural expression of care. Still, Richard's mind was not fully at ease. He needed to see the evidence himself, to understand Clara's intentions from more than her words. Over the next few days, he discreetly observed her interactions with Emily. He watched how Clara helped Emily with her daily routines, how she encouraged her to practice speech exercises, how she celebrated her smallest achievements with joy. He noticed how Emily responded to her, the trust and affection clear in her eyes and gestures. Richard began to realize something he had never acknowledged before: Emily's world was shaped not only by her disability but also by the people who truly cared for her. And Clara was the person who had given her the most consistent love and attention. She had been patient when others were not, gentle when others were harsh, and nurturing when others were indifferent. One afternoon, Richard decided to observe a more private moment. He quietly entered Emily's playroom, careful not to startle them. He saw Clara helping Emily with a drawing activity. Emily struggled to hold the pencil properly, and Clara guided her hand patiently, encouraging her with kind words. When Emily became frustrated, Clara leaned in and whispered something that made her giggle. Then, as Emily began to feel tired and overwhelmed, Clara enveloped her in another gentle hug, soothing her and allowing her to relax. This time, Richard saw it not as a threat, but as a moment of pure care. He felt a pang of guilt for having doubted Clara's intentions. The hug was not an act of overstepping boundaries, it was an expression of love, understanding, and protection. He realized that he had been so consumed with the fear of what could go wrong that he had overlooked what was already right. Richard's reflection led him to think about his own absence. He had been so focused on building his empire that he had missed the small, meaningful moments in Emily's life. Birthdays, achievements, even daily routines had often gone unnoticed by him. Clara had stepped into that gap, filling it with patience and love, and he had failed to see it. That evening, Richard called Clara into his office. He wanted to express his feelings, not just to clear his doubts, but to acknowledge the truth he had come to realize. "Clara," he said quietly, "I need to apologize. I judged you too quickly. I let fear cloud my judgment, and I did not see how much you do for Emily. She trusts you, and I can see now that you care for her deeply." Clara looked at him, her eyes softening. "Sir, my only goal has always been Emily's happiness and safety. That's all I've ever wanted. You don't need to apologize. I understand why you were concerned." Richard felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The tension that had filled the mansion since that first moment of misunderstanding began to ease. He realized that Clara was not just an employee, she was someone who had quietly become an indispensable part of Emily's life. Her love and dedication had filled gaps that even he could not, and he began to understand the true value of her presence. Over the next few days, Richard continued to observe and reflect. He noticed how Emily responded to Clara's guidance and care, how her confidence grew in small ways each day, and how her laughter became more frequent. He realized that emotional support, patience, and genuine affection were just as important as any material comfort he could provide. Richard also began to interact with Emily more consciously. He took time to sit with her during activities, to speak slowly and clearly, to encourage her efforts. With Clara's guidance, he learned how to communicate in ways that Emily could understand, and he discovered that these moments, though small, brought immense joy to both of them. By the end of the week, Richard had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. He had moved from suspicion and doubt to understanding and appreciation. The misunderstanding that had initially caused tension had become a turning point, opening his eyes to the depth of Clara's care and the emotional needs of his daughter. He realized that love cannot be measured by money or status, it is demonstrated through patience, attention, and genuine presence. In the quiet moments of reflection, Richard acknowledged that Clara's hug, which had once seemed shocking, was in fact a symbol of hope and love. It represented the care that Emily had always needed and the commitment of someone who had devoted herself to filling the void in Emily's life. Richard understood that trust, once questioned, could be restored through observation, reflection, and open-mindedness. And so, the household began to shift subtly. Richard's perspective had changed. He started to see the value of small gestures, the importance of emotional presence, and the profound impact of genuine care. The mansion, which had once felt grand but empty, began to feel warmer, more alive. Emily, supported by Clara's consistent love and now by her father's renewed attention, began to flourish in ways Richard had never imagined. Richard's journey in these days was not just about understanding a simple hug, it was about understanding the human heart, the importance of empathy, and the realization that true care cannot be bought, only given freely. Clara's dedication had taught him a lesson that no amount of wealth could ever provide, that love, patience, and presence are priceless, and that sometimes, the people who make the greatest impact are those whose acts go unnoticed until one truly sees them. By the end of Part 2, Richard no longer viewed Clara with suspicion. Instead, he saw her as a partner in raising his daughter, someone whose love and commitment were as vital as any parental guidance. And though the journey was just beginning, a foundation of trust, understanding, and emotional connection had been firmly laid, setting the stage for deeper bonds and life-changing revelations to come. Days passed, and the atmosphere in Richard's mansion began to change. The tension that had gripped him slowly dissolved as he spent more time observing Emily and Clara. What had started as suspicion now became curiosity and, gradually, respect. He began to realize that the moments he had witnessed Clara hugging Emily, gently guiding her hands during activities, whispering comforting words were not just acts of kindness but crucial parts of his daughter's growth and happiness. One sunny afternoon, Richard decided to spend the day with Emily in the garden. He wanted to see how she interacted with her surroundings, to understand the world from her perspective. Clara was with them, as always, ready to assist. Emily's wheelchair rolled smoothly over the paved garden path, and she looked around with wide, curious eyes. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the sound of birds filled the air. For the first time in a long while, Richard felt a sense of calm that he hadn't experienced in years. "Emily," Richard said softly, kneeling beside her, "do you like the flowers?" Emily turned her head toward him and let out a small giggle, pointing at the bright yellow petals of a sunflower. Clara smiled gently, helping her daughter stretch her hand toward the flower so she could touch it. Emily's fingers brushed the petals lightly, and her face lit up with wonder. Richard watched, fascinated by how something so simple could bring so much joy. "Clara," Richard said quietly, "thank you for showing her the little things. I think I've underestimated how important they are to her." Clara shook her head, still smiling. "Sir, it's not about what you can give her, or even what I can give her. It's about helping her experience the world in her own way. She may not be able to run and play like other children, but she can feel, she can explore, she can be happy. That's what matters." Richard listened closely. Her words resonated deeply with him. He had always measured success by results, by tangible achievements, by numbers on a balance sheet. But here was a lesson that no business meeting or financial report could teach: happiness and emotional growth were built on patience, understanding, and small gestures of love. As the day went on, Richard noticed Emily's dependence on Clara. She trusted her completely, following her guidance without hesitation. At first, this had made Richard uneasy, fearing that Emily might grow too attached to someone other than her father. But now, he saw it differently. Clara was not replacing him, she was complementing him. She was providing a layer of support that he, with his busy life, could not always offer. And through observing their interactions, Richard realized that Emily's trust in Clara could serve as a model for trust in him as well. Later that afternoon, Richard brought out a small set of paints. He wanted to try something he had not done in years: engage with Emily in a creative activity. Clara guided him on how to position Emily's hands on the brush and encouraged him to speak gently to her as she painted. At first, Richard felt awkward, unsure of how to communicate effectively with his daughter. But Clara's patient guidance helped him find the right words and gestures. Emily's laughter filled the garden as she smeared bright colors across the paper. Richard joined in, laughing as paint accidentally splattered on his hands. He looked at Clara, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I didn't realize how much I was missing," he admitted. "These little moments, they mean more than anything else." Clara nodded, her expression gentle but firm. "It's never too late to start being present, sir. Emily needs you now, and she will always need your attention. But it's also never wrong to learn from others who love her too." Richard reflected on those words. He realized that his daughter's happiness depended not only on his presence but also on his willingness to let others help. Clara was not a threat, she was a gift. A gift of patience, understanding, and unwavering love. He had spent so long guarding Emily's physical safety that he had overlooked her emotional needs, and Clara had been quietly filling that void all along. As evening approached, Richard decided to take a more proactive role in Emily's daily life. He asked Clara to teach him how to assist Emily with her exercises, how to communicate in ways that were clear and comforting, and how to recognize when she needed support versus when she needed space. Clara agreed, guiding him step by step, never impatient, always encouraging. Over the next few days, a new routine emerged. Richard would wake early to spend time with Emily before heading to work. Clara remained close by, ready to assist, but Richard made an effort to be fully present. He learned to read Emily's expressions, to notice subtle cues in her gestures, and to respond with patience and affection. One morning, as Richard helped Emily practice her speech exercises, he noticed something remarkable. Emily was trying to form a sentence she had struggled with for months. Her lips moved carefully, and after several attempts, she finally said, "I love you." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He looked at Clara, who smiled knowingly, and then back at Emily. Tears welled up in his eyes as he whispered, "I love you too, Emily." For the first time, he felt the depth of connection he had longed for, a bond that went beyond words and actions, a bond built on understanding, patience, and unconditional love. That evening, Richard reflected on how much he had learned in such a short time. Clara's dedication had taught him lessons he could not have learned on his own. He realized that raising a child, especially one with special needs, was not a task that could be accomplished alone. It required teamwork, empathy, and the willingness to see beyond surface appearances. He also began to notice changes in Emily. She seemed more confident, more expressive, and more willing to explore new activities. Her laughter was more frequent, her smiles more genuine, and her trust in both Clara and her father was growing stronger. Richard realized that this growth was not due to material wealth or luxurious surroundings, but to the consistent presence and care of people who truly loved her. Richard's perspective on life began to shift in other ways as well. He started to see the value of slowing down, of being present, and of appreciating the small joys that often went unnoticed. He began to prioritize moments over meetings, connections over contracts, and presence over perfection. And in doing so, he discovered a deeper sense of fulfillment than he had ever experienced before. One afternoon, as he watched Emily play in the garden with Clara nearby, Richard made a decision. He would no longer view Clara as merely an employee, she was a partner in raising his daughter. Her love and dedication were invaluable, and he wanted to honor that by acknowledging her role openly, not just privately. Later that evening, he called Clara into his study. "Clara," he said, his voice steady, "I want you to know that I see everything you do for Emily. Your patience, your love, your guidance, it matters more than you can imagine. I want you to continue being part of her life, not just as a helper, but as someone I trust completely." Clara's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Sir, your words mean a lot. But I do what I do because of Emily, not for recognition. Seeing her happy and confident is all the reward I need." Richard smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Still, you deserve to be acknowledged. You've taught me more about love, patience, and presence than I ever thought possible. Thank you." The weeks that followed marked a transformation in the household. Richard, Clara, and Emily formed a trio of trust, love, and understanding. Richard continued to engage with Emily daily, learning from Clara while contributing his own care and attention. Emily thrived in this environment, her confidence growing with each passing day. Richard began to appreciate the value of collaboration in raising a child. He realized that love was not diminished by sharing it, in fact, it multiplied. The lessons he learned from Clara extended beyond parenting. They influenced how he interacted with colleagues, friends, and even himself. He became more patient, more empathetic, and more willing to listen. And throughout it all, he never forgot the moment that had started it all, the hug in the hallway. What had initially seemed shocking and suspicious now represented the beginning of a journey that transformed not only his relationship with his daughter but also his understanding of love, trust, and human connection. By the end of Part 3, Richard had fully embraced the idea that raising Emily required not just protection but guidance, patience, and emotional presence. He had learned to trust Clara completely, seeing her not as an outsider, but as a partner whose love was essential to his daughter's growth. And as he watched Emily laugh and play, he understood that true wealth was not measured in money or possessions, but in moments of love, trust, and genuine connection, a lesson that would shape their lives forever. As weeks turned into months, the atmosphere in Richard's mansion shifted completely. What had once been a quiet, tense household was now filled with laughter, warmth, and a sense of calm. Richard's perspective on life and parenting had evolved profoundly. He realized that his daughter's happiness did not rely solely on material wealth or protection. It depended on love, patience, and genuine emotional connection. Clara's presence had become an irreplaceable part of Emily's life, and Richard now saw her as more than a caretaker. She was a teacher, a guide, and a friend to both father and daughter. One morning, Richard woke up earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the mansion's large windows. He walked quietly to Emily's room, where Clara was already helping her daughter with morning exercises. Emily's eyes brightened when she saw her father. She reached out for him, and he lifted her carefully from her wheelchair, holding her gently as she balanced for a few moments with his support. "Good morning, Emily," Richard said softly, a smile lighting up his face. "Ready to start the day?" Emily giggled, nodding enthusiastically. Clara watched them with a quiet smile, knowing how far Richard had come in understanding his daughter's needs. She had seen many parents struggle to connect with their children, but Richard had changed. He had learned to slow down, to notice, and most importantly, to trust both Clara and himself. After breakfast, Richard decided to introduce Emily to a new activity: gardening. He remembered how she had enjoyed exploring the garden before, and he wanted to help her develop new skills while strengthening their bond. Clara helped guide Emily's hands as they planted colorful flowers and small vegetables in raised beds that were easy for Emily to reach from her wheelchair. Richard joined in, laughing as he fumbled with the soil and seeds. "This is amazing," Richard said, brushing dirt from his hands. "I never thought I'd enjoy this so much." Clara chuckled softly. "It's not about what you enjoy, sir. It's about helping Emily experience and explore. But sometimes, we end up enjoying it more than we expected." Emily clapped her hands in excitement as a small bee landed on a flower. She tried to reach for it, and Richard gently guided her hands to avoid startling the insect. "Look, Emily," he said. "The bee is helping the flowers grow. Just like we're helping you grow every day." Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with wonder. Though she could not speak full sentences easily, her expressions conveyed her understanding. Clara observed silently, proud of the progress Emily had made and grateful for Richard's growing involvement. As the day continued, Richard noticed subtle changes in his daughter's behavior. She was more confident, more expressive, and more willing to explore new activities. Even small victories, like stacking blocks or painting shapes, brought immense joy to both Emily and her father. Richard began to see that these moments, while seemingly simple, were building blocks for her independence and self-esteem. Later that afternoon, Clara suggested a special activity: music. She had noticed that Emily responded positively to rhythm and melody, so she set up a small keyboard in the living room. Richard watched as Clara encouraged Emily to press the keys, helping her create simple tunes. Emily's face lit up with delight at the sounds she produced. "Try this, Emily," Clara said, guiding her hands. "One note at a time. You can do it." Richard joined in, pressing the keys beside her and smiling as the melodies intertwined. For the first time, he realized that parenting was not just about teaching or guiding, it was about sharing experiences, exploring together, and celebrating every small achievement. As evening approached, Richard reflected on how much he had learned from Clara. He realized that her patience, understanding, and unconditional care had shown him the true meaning of love. It was not about control or authority, it was about support, trust, and connection. Clara had taught him that Emily's happiness and growth depended on emotional presence more than anything else. That night, Richard sat with Emily in her room, reading her favorite storybook aloud. Clara had suggested that they include bedtime stories in their routine, as it encouraged language development and created a calming end to the day. Emily listened intently, occasionally pointing at illustrations and trying to repeat words. Richard's voice was gentle, patient, and filled with emotion, something he had never realized could have such a profound impact. After the story, Richard tucked Emily into bed, brushing her hair gently and holding her hand. "Sleep well, Emily," he whispered. "Tomorrow will be another day full of fun and learning." Clara watched from the doorway, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Richard had come a long way from the man who had once reacted with suspicion and anger. Now, he was a loving, attentive father, willing to learn, grow, and trust others who cared for his daughter. Over the next few days, the household routine became more structured. Richard incorporated activities that encouraged Emily's physical, emotional, and cognitive development. Clara continued to guide both father and daughter, ensuring that Emily's needs were met while fostering independence. Richard found himself learning more than he had expected from Clara, from Emily, and even from himself. One afternoon, Richard invited a few close friends over to see Emily's progress. He wanted them to witness not just her abilities but also the transformation in their family dynamic. As his friends arrived, they were greeted by Emily's laughter and the sight of her painting a colorful picture with Clara and Richard by her side. "This is incredible," one friend said, amazed at how engaged Emily was. "She looks so happy and confident." Richard smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "It's all thanks to Clara," he said, nodding toward her. "She has taught me how to truly be present for Emily, how to guide her, and how to love her in ways I didn't understand before." Clara blushed slightly but nodded. "Emily is an amazing child. She deserves every opportunity to explore and grow. I'm just helping her along the way." Richard realized that acknowledging Clara's contribution publicly was important, not just for her but for Emily as well. It showed that love and support came from many sources, and that collaboration was a strength, not a weakness. As the weeks continued, Richard began to notice changes within himself as well. He was more patient, more empathetic, and more willing to listen not just to Emily but to everyone around him. The lessons he had learned through parenting and observing Clara's dedication extended into his work, friendships, and personal life. He understood that true leadership and success were not measured by wealth or power but by the ability to connect with others, to nurture, and to grow together. One evening, as Richard and Clara helped Emily prepare for bed, a sense of peace settled over the household. Emily was tired but content, her eyes sparkling with joy from the day's activities. Richard held her gently, whispering words of love and encouragement. Clara stood nearby, ready to assist but giving space for the father-daughter bond to strengthen. In that quiet moment, Richard realized the full impact of what he had witnessed months ago: the hug, the gentle care, and the unconditional love Clara had shown his daughter. It had been a turning point, a moment that changed not only his understanding of his child but also his perspective on life itself. He had learned to trust, to let go of control, and to embrace love in its purest form. The next morning, Richard decided to take Emily on a small outing. He wanted her to experience the world beyond the mansion, to explore new sights and sounds while feeling safe and supported. Clara accompanied them, ensuring that Emily's needs were met and that the experience was enjoyable. At the park, Emily's laughter echoed as she watched birds fly, felt the grass beneath her hands, and interacted with other children. Richard stayed close, guiding her carefully and sharing in her wonder. Clara observed, her heart full of pride, knowing that Richard had become an active, engaged, and loving father. As they returned home, Richard reflected on how far they had come. Emily had grown more confident and expressive, he had become a more present and patient parent, and Clara had become an indispensable partner in this journey. The mansion was no longer just a place of wealth and luxury, it was a home filled with love, trust, and the simple joys of everyday life. By the end of Part 4, Richard had fully embraced the lessons that Clara had taught him. He understood that raising Emily required more than financial resources. It required time, patience, understanding, and unconditional love. He had learned to appreciate the small victories, to celebrate every moment of progress, and to trust in the support of those who cared deeply for his daughter. For the first time, Richard felt a sense of true fulfillment. He realized that the real wealth in life was not money or possessions, but the love shared between people, the trust built through patience, and the joy found in small, meaningful moments. And as he watched Emily drift off to sleep that night, he knew that their journey together was just beginning, a journey filled with love, growth, and endless possibilities. The following morning, the mansion felt lighter than ever before. Sunlight poured through the large windows, illuminating the polished floors and bright walls, but it was not the sunlight alone that made the home feel warm. It was the laughter, the quiet conversations, and the sense of connection that now filled every room. Richard had woken early, as he often did, but this morning he did not feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Instead, he felt calm, confident, and grateful. Emily was already awake, her face glowing with excitement as she clutched her favorite stuffed animal. Clara had helped her get ready, brushing her hair and making sure her wheelchair was comfortable. Richard watched them from the doorway, a soft smile spreading across his face. For the first time in years, he truly felt like a family, not just a household with rules and routines, but a living, breathing unit bound by love, trust, and understanding. "Good morning, my brave girl," Richard said gently as he entered the room. He knelt beside Emily, carefully helping her adjust her position. Emily's small hand reached for his, and he held it tightly, feeling the warmth and innocence of her touch. "Good morning, Daddy," Emily said in her soft, slow voice. She had been practicing speaking more clearly, and each word she managed to say felt like a triumph. Clara smiled from across the room, seeing the joy radiating from both father and daughter. She had become accustomed to witnessing these small victories, and they never failed to touch her heart. Over time, she had grown attached not just to Emily, but also to Richard, who had transformed from a man of suspicion and distance into a loving, open-hearted father. After breakfast, Richard decided to surprise Emily with a trip she had longed for, a visit to the small zoo near the city. Clara helped plan the outing, ensuring that Emily's wheelchair would have smooth access and that she would have enough rest breaks throughout the day. Richard wanted this to be more than just a fun excursion, he wanted it to be a chance for Emily to experience the world, to feel included, and to enjoy simple joys just like any other child. As they arrived at the zoo, Emily's eyes widened with amazement. The vibrant colors, the sounds of animals, and the smell of fresh grass and flowers filled her senses. She reached out eagerly to point at the monkeys swinging from branches, the peacocks strutting proudly, and the elephants lumbering gracefully. Richard guided her carefully, ensuring she could see and interact with each animal without fear or strain. Clara walked alongside them, ready to assist whenever needed, but mostly enjoying the sight of Richard fully engaged with his daughter. "This is amazing, Emily," Richard said, laughing as she tried to mimic the monkey's movements with her tiny arms. "Look at you. You're swinging just like them." Emily giggled, the sound pure and infectious. For Richard, hearing that laughter felt like the greatest reward. It reminded him of why he had made the choices he had, why he had learned to trust Clara, and why he had embraced the lessons of patience and love. Each smile, each laugh, each tiny accomplishment was proof that they were on the right path. Later in the day, they reached the butterfly garden, a favorite spot of Emily's. She had always been fascinated by the delicate creatures, and seeing them up close made her eyes sparkle with wonder. Clara helped guide Emily's hands toward the butterflies, allowing her to feel their gentle wings without causing harm. Richard knelt beside her, marveling at the simple beauty of the moment. "Daddy, look!" Emily exclaimed softly. "Pretty." "Yes, Emily," Richard replied, smiling. "Just like you." He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, feeling a deep sense of pride and love that he could not put into words. As they left the zoo and returned home, Richard reflected on the incredible journey they had all taken. Months ago, he had walked into his living room to find Clara hugging Emily and had been filled with suspicion and anger. But that single, quiet act of care had changed everything. Clara had shown him the power of unconditional love, the importance of trust, and the true meaning of family. Without realizing it, she had not only cared for his daughter but had transformed him into a better man, a better father, and a better person. Back at the mansion, Emily was tired but happy. Richard helped her settle into her room, brushing her hair and tucking her in with the stuffed animals she loved so much. Clara stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. Richard turned to her and said softly, "Clara, I don't know how I can ever thank you for everything you've done. You didn't just care for Emily, you taught me how to be a father, how to love, and how to see the world differently." Clara shook her head gently. "You did all the work, sir. I just guided you." Emily responded, "Because you were willing to learn, willing to be patient, and willing to open your heart." Richard smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He realized that gratitude alone was not enough, he wanted to honor Clara's guidance in a meaningful way. Over the next few days, he made plans to show her how deeply he appreciated her presence in their lives. He knew that words alone could never express the impact she had made, but actions could. He started small, ensuring Clara had her own space in the mansion where she could rest, study, or enjoy her favorite hobbies. He encouraged Emily to create small gifts and drawings for Clara, which she did with joy and excitement. These gestures, though simple, strengthened the bond between all three of them and created a sense of family that went beyond titles or positions. One evening, Richard decided to host a small dinner to celebrate their journey together. It was just the three of them, but the atmosphere was filled with laughter, warmth, and gratitude. Emily helped set the table, carefully placing napkins and utensils with Clara's guidance. Richard prepared a few simple dishes, enjoying the process and the opportunity to spend quality time with his daughter. As they sat down to eat, Richard raised a toast. "To Emily, for teaching me joy and patience. To Clara, for showing me the true meaning of love and care. And to all of us, for becoming a family in every sense of the word." Clara and Emily smiled, touched by his words. Emily clapped her hands softly, and Clara's eyes glistened with tears of happiness. It was a moment of pure connection, a testament to how far they had come. After dinner, they moved to the living room for a quiet storytelling session. Richard read aloud from Emily's favorite book, with Clara helping to turn the pages and guide her daughter's hand. Emily leaned against her father, listening intently, occasionally pointing to illustrations and repeating words she had learned. Richard's voice was calm and expressive, conveying warmth, love, and encouragement. As the story ended, Emily yawned and nestled against Richard. He held her gently, feeling her small hand in his and realizing the depth of the bond they shared. Clara stood nearby, smiling quietly, knowing that her role had helped create this extraordinary moment of family harmony. That night, Richard reflected on the lessons he had learned throughout their journey. He understood that love was not measured by wealth or status, but by patience, care, and emotional presence. He realized that family was not defined solely by blood or titles, but by connection, trust, and shared experiences. Most importantly, he had learned that true happiness came from giving, supporting, and embracing the people you love fully and unconditionally. The following weeks were filled with new routines, adventures, and small victories. Emily continued to grow more confident and expressive, Richard became more patient and nurturing, and Clara remained a steady guide and friend. Together, they created a home filled with laughter, love, and endless possibilities. One day, as Richard watched Emily paint a picture of their family, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He looked at Clara and said softly, "You know, I used to think wealth and success were the most important things in life. But now I see that they mean nothing without love, trust, and connection. You've given us something far more valuable than money could ever buy." Clara smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "That's all any of us need, sir." Love and care, that's what makes life meaningful. Richard nodded, holding Emily's hand as she proudly showed off her painting. In that moment, he understood that their journey had not just changed Emily's life, it had transformed his own. He had become a father who was present, loving, and patient. He had learned the value of trust, the importance of guidance, and the power of unconditional love. As the sun set over the mansion, casting a warm golden glow over the garden, Richard realized that life had given him a second chance, a chance to become the father he had always wanted to be, a chance to build a family filled with love, and a chance to learn the true meaning of happiness. Emily fell asleep that night with a smile on her face, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Richard sat beside her bed, watching over her and feeling a deep sense of peace. Clara quietly tidied the room and left, knowing that her work had helped create a bond that would last a lifetime.